November 14, 2021. At approximately 2:03 a.m., a motion alert was triggered by a surveillance camera installed at the entrance of a small residential street in Block C, Northview Colony. At first, it didn't seem unusual. The system was designed to detect movement. Cars passing. People walking. Even stray animals. But this alert was different. Because when the security guard reviewed the footage, there was no one there. The street was empty. No movement. No shadow. No visible figure. And yet, the streetlight above the camera turned on. Northview Colony wasn't a high-security area. But after a series of minor thefts earlier that year, residents had installed a few shared CCTV cameras at key entry points. One of them was positioned directly beneath a streetlight. The system had a simple function. When motion was detected, the camera would record, and the streetlight would automatically activate. That's what made the footage confusing. Because the system had clearly detected something. But the camera had not. The security guard, Rashid Khan, had been working night shifts for over 5 years. He was familiar with false alerts. Insects flying close to the lens. Shadows from passing cars. Rain reflections. But this wasn't like that. There was no distortion. No flicker. No environmental interference. Just a still frame. And a light turning on. He replayed the footage. 2:02 and 51 seconds a.m., street completely dark. 2:02 and 53 seconds a.m., no movement. Then, 2:02 and 54 seconds a.m. The streetlight activates. Instantly. Without transition. Without flicker. Just, on. Rashid leaned closer to the monitor. Something about the timing felt precise. Too precise. So he slowed the footage down. Frame by frame. And that's when he noticed something subtle. Just before the light turned on, the camera adjusted exposure. Very slightly. As if reacting to something entering the frame. But nothing appeared. No shape. No outline. No shadow. Just an automatic response to something that wasn't visible. Rashid marked the clip. Saved it. And continued his shift. At that moment, it was just a strange recording. Nothing more. But the next night, it happened again. Same location. Same camera. This time at 2:07 a.m. The streetlight turned on. With no one there. Now it wasn't random. It was a pattern. Over the next 3 nights, the same event repeated. Different times. But always between 2 a.m. and 2:15 a.m. And always, the same sequence. Dark street. No movement. Then, light. Rashid reported it to the colony management. At first, they assumed a technical issue. Maybe the motion sensor was faulty. Maybe the camera was misaligned. So they did what any system would require. They tested it. The next evening, before midnight, they manually triggered the system. A person walked under the streetlight. The light turned on. The camera recorded. Everything worked perfectly. Then they tried something else. They placed an object under the light. No movement. No activation. The system required motion. Actual presence. Which meant, something had triggered it. Even if it couldn't be seen. That's when they installed an additional camera. A second angle. Facing the same streetlight. From across the road. If something was being missed, this would capture it. The system was reset. And they waited. November 18, 2:11 a.m. Both cameras were recording. The street was empty. No movement. No sound. Then, both cameras detected motion. At the same time. And the streetlight turned on. 2 angles. 2 recordings. Same result. Nothing visible. That should have ended the investigation. A malfunction. An unexplained trigger. But one detail changed everything. On the second camera, for a single frame, something blocked the light. Not fully. Not clearly. But enough to cast a shadow. A shadow with no source. The moment that single frame was identified, the investigation changed direction completely. Because until that point, everything could still be explained as a malfunction. A faulty sensor. A software glitch. An environmental trigger. But a shadow requires a source. And in that frame, there was no visible object, no person, no obstruction, that could have created it. The footage was extracted immediately. Not just replayed. Isolated. Enhanced. Analyzed frame by frame using higher contrast and exposure tools. The goal was simple. Find what the camera missed. The first thing they confirmed was that the shadow was real. It wasn't noise. It wasn't compression artifact. It wasn't a glitch. It had depth. Shape. Consistency. But it didn't behave like a normal shadow. Because it didn't stretch. It didn't follow the angle of the light. And most importantly, it didn't connect to anything. It appeared, for a fraction of a second, directly beneath the streetlight. Then vanished. At that point, colony management contacted a private security technician. Someone who had experience with surveillance systems and anomaly detection. His name was Farhan Siddiqui. He arrived the next evening. Reviewed the setup. And started with the basics. Sensor calibration. Camera alignment. Light activation timing. Everything was functioning within normal parameters. No delay. No misfire. No false trigger. Then he reviewed the footage himself. Not casually. But systematically. He mapped out every activation over the past 5 nights. And something became clear. The timing wasn't random. It wasn't exactly the same every night, but it followed a pattern. Each activation occurred slightly later than the previous one. By 3 to 5 minutes. 2:03 a.m., 2:07 a.m., 2:11 a.m., 2:15 a.m. and then, on the 6th night, 2:19 a.m. It was moving. Not physically, but temporally. As if something was arriving, later each night. Farhan made a decision. They would extend observation. Not just one camera. Multiple. Over the next 48 hours, additional cameras were installed across the street. Different angles. Different heights. Different distances. Some focused directly on the light. Others captured surrounding areas. The idea was simple: if something was there, it wouldn't escape every angle. On November 20th, all cameras were active. Recording continuously. From midnight onward. At 2:19 a.m., the street remained empty. No movement. No sound. At 2:20 a.m., all cameras detected motion. Simultaneously. And the streetlight turned on. Farhan immediately pulled all feeds. Side by side. Frame by frame. Camera 1, empty street. Camera 2, empty street. Camera 3, empty street. Camera 4, paused. There it was again. The shadow. But this time, it lasted longer. Not just a single frame. 2. Still unclear. Still incomplete. But more defined. It had a shape. Not fully human. Not fully distorted. But structured. Vertical. Standing. And positioned, directly under the light. The others didn't see it. Only that one camera. Farhan isolated that angle. Enhanced contrast. Slowed playback. The shape didn't move. It didn't shift. It didn't react. It just stood there. And then, it was gone. That's when something else was noticed. The audio feed. Up until now, no one had focused on it. Because the system wasn't designed for sound detection. But one of the cameras had a basic microphone. Farhan increased the volume. At first, nothing. Then, a faint sound. Not wind. Not static. Something else. A low-frequency pattern. Almost like breathing. Slow. Even. And synchronized with the moment the light turned on. That detail changed everything. Because now, it wasn't just visual. Something was being detected. Across multiple systems. Motion. Light. Audio. All reacting to the same presence. Even if that presence couldn't be seen. At this point, Farhan made a recommendation. They needed a controlled test. Not just observation. Interaction. Because whatever was triggering the system was following a pattern. And patterns can be predicted. The next night, they prepared something different. Instead of waiting passively, they placed a marker. A small object. Directly under the streetlight. Positioned precisely. So that any disturbance would be visible. Cameras were set. Audio levels increased. All feeds monitored in real time. Time passed. 2:21 a.m. Nothing. 2:22 a.m. Still nothing. Then, 2:23 a.m. The system triggered. The light turned on. And the object moved. Not slightly. Not by wind. It shifted. As if something had stepped around it. But again, nothing was there. The room monitoring the feed went completely silent. Because for the first time, whatever was under that light had interacted with something physical. And that meant, it wasn't just a signal. It wasn't just a shadow. It was there. By the time the object moved under the streetlight, the investigation had already crossed into a space where technical explanations no longer held enough weight. What had initially been treated as a system anomaly had now become a repeated, measurable interaction with something that could not be seen, yet was clearly affecting the environment. The fact that motion sensors were triggering, the light was activating, audio was registering patterns, and now a physical object had been displaced, meant that whatever existed under that streetlight was not just a visual illusion or a software error. It was interacting with reality in a way that could be recorded, tracked, and, to some extent, predicted. Farhan Siddiqui understood this immediately. Instead of shutting down the system or dismissing the event, he made a decision that would define the final stage of the investigation. If the presence followed a pattern, and all evidence suggested that it did, then it could be anticipated. And if it could be anticipated, then it could be observed under controlled conditions. Not passively. Not from a distance. But directly. The plan was simple in concept, but difficult in execution. The street would remain empty, as it had been during previous nights. All residents were instructed to stay indoors after 1:30 a.m. Cameras would remain active, covering every possible angle of the streetlight. Audio levels would be increased further. But this time, there would be one variable that had not existed before. A person. On the night of November 22nd, at approximately 2:18 a.m., Farhan himself stood beneath the streetlight. He was alone. No one else in the frame. No one else on the street. The colony was completely silent. Inside the monitoring room, multiple officers and technicians watched the live feed from different camera angles. Every movement, every shift in light, every change in audio was being tracked in real time. The expectation wasn't certainty. It was observation. They didn't know if anything would happen. But based on the pattern, if the presence was real, this was the window. At 2:20 a.m., nothing had changed. Farhan stood still, exactly where the object had been placed the night before. The streetlight remained off. The cameras showed no movement. The audio feed was flat. At 2:21 a.m., something subtle shifted. The camera exposure adjusted. Slightly. Not enough to notice casually. But enough to indicate that the system was reacting. Farhan didn't move. He had been instructed not to. No sudden actions. No reactions. Just remain still. At 2:22 a.m., the audio feed registered the first anomaly. A low-frequency pattern. Consistent. Rhythmic. Breathing. Not loud. Not aggressive. But present. And not coming from Farhan. Inside the monitoring room, the technicians increased the audio gain. The pattern became clearer. Inhale. Pause. Exhale. Slow. Measured. And positioned, very close to the microphone. Farhan still hadn't moved. But something else had. Because at that exact moment, the streetlight turned on. Instantly. No flicker. No delay. Just light. From every camera angle, the frame was now fully illuminated. Farhan stood exactly where he had been. Alone. But the audio didn't stop. In fact, it became clearer. Closer. As if whatever was producing it had moved nearer. Farhan later described this moment in his report. Not as fear. Not as panic. But as awareness. He said, for the first time, it didn't feel like the street was empty anymore. He couldn't see anything. But the space around him felt occupied. That's when something happened that none of the cameras fully captured. Farhan took a step back. Just one. And in that exact moment, camera 2 recorded something. Not clearly. Not fully. But enough. A distortion. A shape. Standing where he had been seconds earlier. Not visible in full form. Not defined. But present. For less than a second. Then gone. Farhan exited the area immediately after that. The test was over. No one attempted it again. Over the next few days, all footage was reviewed. Analyzed. Cross-checked. The conclusion wasn't written in official terms. Because there was no official category for what had been recorded. But internally, everyone agreed on one thing. The presence was real. Not visible. But real. The colony made its own decision after that. No formal announcement. No public explanation. Just a change. By 8:30 p.m., the streets would empty. By 9 p.m., no one was outside. Not children. Not adults. No one. Because whatever existed under that streetlight only appeared before that time. Years later, the system is still active. The cameras still record. The streetlight still functions. And according to archived logs, the motion detection still triggers. Occasionally. At irregular intervals. Always between 2 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. The footage is rarely reviewed now. But the pattern never completely stopped. And one final detail remains in the last recording.